met, they're leaving a lot of money on the table. Some of the early lessons that I learned in regard to cost of poor quality, which is a term that doesn't really explain anymore, particularly if you're a service company, what it actually is. People, understand that a hardware product, you can see that if it's reworked, it's because there was something wrong with it or poor quality. But people don't always associate a bad process with poor quality. They don't say, oh, because I had too many errors, the process had bad quality. But nonetheless, trying to come up with a better term, the industry has coined that term, cost of poor quality. In today's session, we're going to talk about that. But before we start the session, I want to tell you a story. Many of us have been told, go reduce costs. Many of you are in a position to reduce costs. Many of you are professional process improvement experts that are out there to reduce costs. What I want to do is distinguish how we look at costs versus the cost of poor quality. Because many times management does not distinguish the two, and they will send out an edict that says, hey, we want to reduce costs by 10%. And so we mobilize the troops, and the troops are the managers and leaders who then go out and try to find that 10%. Many times, because of the speed at which they're trying to do it or their lack of knowledge on what to cut, everything looks equal. We do 10% straight across the board, 5% straight across the board. And it's unfortunate because the way I define a cost should be the minimum amount of money that we have to spend to meet the customer needs and the business needs. So for instance, if we have a call center and that call center is critical to quality component of our service, and part of that service is an accurate and quick call, that when a person calls into the information center, they get exactly that, a fast turnaround and a quick call. But if we said, let's go reduce costs, someone might take out 2 or 3 people in the call center. Yes, we reduce costs, but what we've also done is possibly increased wait times, resolution time, or even disappointed customers. So in other words, a cost is something related to meeting the customer need. A cost of poor quality is something we pay for that was in addition to meeting the need because we failed to do something right the first time. And I'd like to tell you a sesame seed story. Here's an example. Manufacturer of sesame seed buns. You can pick your own country and your own kind of company. I won't say who it is, but this organization embarked upon reducing costs, and they went out after the sesame seeds on a sesame seed bun. And they decided if we can cut 10% of the seeds, we'll save millions of dollars over the many, many buns. And so they did that. And the person was rewarded for his cost savings. So they said, let's do it again. And they reduced the seeds 10%, saved millions of dollars. They did this 3 times. By the time the 3rd time came around, we started to notice less and less seeds. And as the customer, we eventually even saw that there were no seeds on the bun. And so when you went to buy a sesame seed bun, there were very few sesame seeds, so they did not buy them. Subsequently, that business lost demand and started losing sales. Why? We cut costs, but the costs that we cut were related to the feature that satisfied the customer. They wanted sesame seeds on a sesame seed bun, and they noticed that if there weren't sesame seeds on the bun, they assumed they were stale, and so they wouldn't eat them, and they wouldn't buy them. Now, to correct that problem, they had to market and advertise and put more sesame seeds on the bun, and they ended up spending more money than they cut. At the same time they were reducing these costs, they could have gone after the losses due to stale buns. In other words, buns that were returned to the store that were really stale or crushed or damaged. That cost of poor quality was 10 times the value of the cost reduction. So the first thing I want to point out is that we need to truly understand that a cost is a good thing if it's a minimum cost that meets a customer requirement. In addition to that, it's a cost of poor quality. and we tend to pay more than we really need to. And if you ignore these hidden costs, they could be significant. Now, many of you that are rooted in Six Sigma or Lean or quality improvement, process improvement, I'm sure have heard about the cost of poor quality. And unfortunately, many of us and many people in your organization may be uninterested or uninformed, or they think the cost of poor quality is for manufacturing people. And also, the finance people aren't taught cost of poor quality when they go through accounting. It's something that you learn on the job. And so lack of information leads to lack of use of the tool. Dr. Juran pointed out very early on, after Armin Feigenbaum from GE actually established the cost of poor quality industry, that the purpose of the cost of poor quality was an estimate of the losses that would excite management into doing something about it, attacking that cost of poor quality and doing projects aimed at reducing that. So one aspect of cost of poor quality was to drive upper management. Another aspect was to be able to pick projects. If we know what the costs are, we can burrow down to good projects. As we go into this cost of poor quality, I just want to keep those new viewers out there. Dr. Juran has passed away a number of years ago, about 8 years ago. He was a prolific writer. We continue to write about what works, what doesn't work, and we publish them. We are a consulting company. We try to publish best practices. In regards to cost of poor quality, we actually have quite a few competitors and quite a few people out there that actually cite our work on cost of poor quality. Over my 26 years here with Juran, we have conducted numerous large cost of poor quality studies on industries as well as clients and businesses. And over time it changes a little bit, but the cost of poor quality, unless you've attacked it, doesn't really get down very much until you really go after it for 2 or 3 or 4 years. So we've got some experience in that. We're going to share that with you today. So what we want to do is try to get you to help leaders see the magnitude of the loss and make sure that you can feel comfortable talking about cost of poor quality. And I will tell you that it's an estimate. It's not a nickel and dime exercise. It's an estimate. Understand the link between prices, costs, and profitability because of the cost of quality. Cost of quality is bigger than cost of poor quality. Cost of quality are the costs we need to spend and those costs of poor quality that happen to come along for the ride. We want to gain knowledge of some of the ways we categorize cost of poor quality and cost of quality and learn how to determine the magnitude and then drive improvement from that. We also want to mention internal expertise that just like creating black belts or green belts or lean senseis, you want to have people who are knowledgeable about cost of poor quality. As always, I'd like to have a show of hands here. Let me just go one more and then let you do a little poll. We've been conducting assessments a lot. Some of you may have participated in a cost of poor quality study. And whatever term you use, whether it's cost of quality, cost of poor quality, cost of nonconformance, COPQ, whatever it is, do you do some kind of estimate of the total loss to the business unit or the organization? So my first poll here is, how often does your organization assess the cost of poor quality? If you have no clue what I'm talking about, just put down we don't. Go ahead and take a moment there. And I believe newcomers, you'll see the results up there. I'm not surprised to see we don't leading the pack. Just think if our American presidential election was this fast. We could decide halfway through if we want to change our minds. Okay, so almost 50% of you don't. I wish I could just see the looks on your face by the second question. Do you want to? So let's do a show of hands. Do you think it's important that you learn more about cost of poor quality? So let's do a show of hands. Everybody can click on that little box and you'll see. The question was, do we want to? Very nice. You're making me feel good on a Wednesday afternoon. Okay. And I'm always going to give the opposite side of that story. If someone here doesn't want to learn about cost of poor quality, I'm not going to ask you any question. I'm just going to see you probably leave this session. So for those of us who are here, let's continue on. Okay. Why cost of poor quality? Well, Dr. Juran was very clear that managers and employees must speak the language of upper management. We tend to speak the language of things, while upper management speaks the language of money. Cost of poor quality allows us to translate things into money. My example of the call center. Number of people answering phones are things. You remove those things, we get customer dissatisfaction. The loss from that dissatisfaction becomes the language of business, the language of money. The sesame seeds on the bun are a cost, but the cost to repair the ill will and the customer dissatisfaction when we remove too much of that became the importance to the business. And so translating that value into the language of money is what the cost of poor quality is about. Now, why focus on it? Well, let's take a look at a typical scenario. Whether your organization is $1,000 or $10,000 or $10 million or $1 billion or $10 billion, that you have total cost of operation of X, and hopefully you have some percent profit. So everything we spend our energy on and sell our products and services end up with some profit. Now, what you don't see is in this total operating cost, there is a hidden cost, and that's the cost related to poor performing processes or cost of poor quality. And it tends to be significant if you haven't looked for it. A widget or goods manufacturer may have 5 to 15% of their total operating costs consumed in rework, redoing, extra checking, extra assurance to make sure the product doesn't harm the customer or doesn't fail the customer. And so this hidden cost of poor quality is preventing the organization from being more profitable. Now, another scenario is happening is that a lot of organizations aren't able to get the sales increasing, and so they're seeing a decline in their total profit, but the operating costs stay the same. One reason is because we tend to get management that wants to chew at these operating costs. In other words, take out the call center people, take off the sesame seeds, without looking first here. An effective performance excellence program like Lean and Six Sigma should only go after the red first and then any other costs after. There's a very simple reason for that. The cost of poor quality, we've already incurred the expense. Why not go after and fix it so we spend a little money on analysis, but we start to gain more money in profit? So by attacking the cost of poor quality, keeping the same sales performance, we're now going to be more profitable. So if you do the math, if 10% of our total organization performance or total operating cost is cost of poor quality, and we could cut that in half, we're going to double our profit. If we had to increase sales to double our profit, think about the additional things we would have to do. We'd have to have more customers. We already said we're having trouble getting more customers. We'd probably have to lower price. We'd probably have to provide better features, maybe even have to grow our sales force. But if we can focus on cost of poor quality, we might be able to get rid of the reasons why customers don't buy more of our product, not add more sales force, just add more sales and reduce those ways. So you can ask yourself, which feels better? So the cost of poor quality is the negative, or are the negative costs that happen because we don't do a really good job of understanding customer requirements, converting them into our services or products, and then continue servicing them afterwards. So because we don't understand their need, we put a product or service out there and it's marginally accepted, then we have to give the customer some credits, some allowances, some payback, something to help buy it, lower price. Then we have to deal with their complaints when it doesn't work properly, et cetera, et cetera. So why do we focus on cost of poor quality? Because it's money you've already spent. Now, Lean and Six Sigma programs are very effective at going after this cost of poor quality, and it should be, because once you identify what it is, Then you can pick a project with a clear mission to attack it. Over here, every cost looks the same. So if every cost looks the same, what's going to separate what we work on? By categorizing them in a way, we're able to pick those really big cost of poor quality attributes or problems and go after them. Also, I mentioned earlier that we tend to go after cost reduction equally. The 2-person department or the 200-person department still has to reduce cost 10%. Well, it's pretty easy to reduce 10% of 200. It's not so easy to reduce 10% of 2. So you have to think about cost of poor quality and look at it as what's important to the customer and what's important to the business. My example of the sesame seed and the call center, those were important to the business in terms of reducing costs. But the feature, the sesame seeds, and the accuracy and quick responsiveness from the call center, those features were removed or made less. And so we don't want to attack features. We want to attack the cost of producing those features when they're not done right the first time. Our society, the Society for Quality around the world, defines the total cost of quality as those costs that we incur to prevent failure, like design reviews, education and training of people on the job, work instructions, most of the costs in the organization that help us do the right things the right time. We also have some costs in the organization that's related to compliance, appraisal, quality assurance, quality control. Why do we do that? Well, because some industries and some regulatory bodies require it. That's number one. Number two, when there's a high risk involved, either high risk of injury or harming a person, or a high risk of harming the business because it's too costly, we incur costs to check things. We do audits. We do ISO 9000 environmental system, SEC audits. Those are audits to make sure we're doing the things we need to do to prevent failure. So some of these costs are good, but some organizations have excess appraisal, too many audits, too many checks, because something we're doing over here isn't right, or because we have so many of these. Too much appraisal is not good. So some appraisal is good, some appraisal is bad. Another category are those costs that we incur within the organization that the customer never sees. It's really easy to see an inspection line that a bunch of widgets coming off the line, and someone at the end of the line is sorting those widgets. And the good ones go to the customer and the bad ones go for rework. Customer never sees them. That's very costly, and it's a good customer service thing, but if you don't tack the reasons for the defect, you eventually keep losing money. We just categorize those as internal failures, mainly because the internal failure tends to be easier to go after and fix. And then lastly is the external failure. The cost of the money we spend to fix the problem after the customer uses it or gets it or sees it. And you could guess that the total cost over here is going to be much greater, because when it's in the hands of the customer and it fails, not only do we have to fix the product or service, we probably have to give something to the customer in return. It could be a penalty, it could be an allowance, it could be a credit, it could be a free product. So it's more expensive as an external failure, and it's least expensive as a prevention. So the costs tend to go up in this direction. So what is the total cost of quality? It's the prevention plus some of the appraisal and all those failure costs. Now, if we were to then say, what's the cost of poor quality? Well, it's some of the appraisal and all the failure costs. So it does not include prevention, because that's good, and it doesn't include some of that appraisal. So the stuff over here on the right is the big deal. And some people call this side cost of attaining quality versus cost of poor quality. Whatever word you use, what's important is that you see the differences. If we were to take the company from back here, and we were to say, if we looked at that 100%, what does it look like in the categories? It might look like this. Maybe not. It would look that prevention is the least money spent, appraisal is the second least, maybe in the 5 to 10% categories, and internal and external failure account for 50 to 80% of the total cost of poor quality. And that makes sense. When we first start out looking at cost of poor quality, the failures are costing us a lot. We didn't know they were so bad, so we didn't spend a lot of money over here. Now we have to launch some improvement teams. We're going to spend more money over here to drive these down. As we drive these down and drove these costs up, we got a much better scenario. Another way to look at our definition is that all the activities in a process that do not meet our agreed performance or expected outcomes cost us money. And I want to point out here that when we talk about money, we're not talking about 2 minutes and 3 minutes. We're talking about, we have 5 additional finance accountants in the accounting department working on customer complaints because the customers are not paying on time, and they're not paying on time, so we have high receivables. We have high receivables because there are errors in their invoices, and unless we fix the errors in the invoices, the customer is not going to pay. So we are talking about costs that would disappear if things were working without deficiency. Which brings us to poll number 2. And I'm going to explain this to you first before you select anything. If we looked at the total cost of poor quality in a manufacturing organization, I stated that it would be somewhere around 5 to 15%. Service organizations tend to be 20 to 40%. So the more service you are, the more labor intensive, the higher the cost of poor quality, because the cost of correcting people is much more expensive than the cost of correcting a widget. So now with that little scenario in mind, go ahead and continue to answer this question here. Okay, now I'm going to tell you what reality looks like. Almost 100% of the time when we talk to our customers about what they think the cost of poor quality is in their organization, they're usually off by a magnitude of 100%. In other words, double it. Why? Well, you're going to see why. Most people don't know it's there, and they can't imagine it's there, so therefore they estimate it to be low. Because naturally we're managers, we're leaders, we're savvy finance people, we're great engineers. So where is it? Well, unfortunately, cost is hidden. It's hidden in labor hours, it's hidden in energy, it's hidden in our departments. Most P&Ls, profit and loss statements, are done by department or by function. They're not done by process. So cost of poor quality looks at a process moving, activity moving across an organization, and the P&L doesn't show it that way. So we have to look at it differently. So what people tend to see are the tip of the iceberg. They say, oh, we have X amount of returns, we spend X amount on waste, we spend X amount on rework. They get that. And they say, oh, so our cost is that. But when you really look deeper and you look into that iceberg, these costs are doubling and even tripling what these are. Why? Because these are unnoticed, they're unattended to, and they keep growing. These get attention. Not only that, the more high volumes you are, the bigger the problem is going to be. So what we tend to see is that the real cost of poor quality is about 15 to 18%, with a range of being 10 to 25. But if you've never done anything, and if you're a service company, it's going to be that much higher. When we talk about cost of poor quality, okay, someone just pointed out that they have a picture of the iceberg on their cubicle wall. So I'm very happy that you're there to remind yourself all the waste that your company incurs all day long, and that your job is to remind them of it and attack it and get rid of it. Someone also said the audio is breaking up. Let's just do a quick check. Anybody having trouble with the audio? Raise your hand. It could be just my voice. Okay, I'll just have to try to speak a little bit louder. Naturally, when someone can't hear, you just speak louder. instead of fix the technology. So what does reality look like? I mentioned this before. The internal and external failures are going to be your two biggest categories. And I will tell you, most organizations do a very good job of preventing external failures, except in the rare and critical instances. Particularly the food industry and regulated industries. The failures that occur are less, but becoming more frequent as more and more people are pushing agriculture and things like that to the limit, and biomedical and stuff like that. But generally, we do a good job of capturing it, and therefore we tend to be internally focused. However, when you start to look at other costs, like the litigation costs every year when something is wrong, credits and allowances we give back to the customers, additional energy we have to burn, additional buildings we have to build to house things that are not good, additional people we have to hire to make up for the losses of people who aren't here or do things wrong. Those numbers are significant. Now, the appraisal number here has got a very big swing. One reason is the organizations that are highly regulatory requirements have a lot more compliance requirements, and the cost could be very high. Right now, we tell people to really focus on looking at your cost of compliance, because if your cost of compliance is going up and your failure rate is not changing, then you're not doing the right things. But you could have a significant amount of money in checking regulatory standardization by third parties, or you could be down the lower end. If you have a very high cost of appraisal and a very low cost of failure, then you're probably doing the right things. And look at this. The prevention costs are minimal. And every accountant understands this picture. If we want to get rid of these failures, we have to start with prevention. We have to start doing things that would get rid of them. Prevention costs are lean, Six Sigma-like projects, quality self-control assessment, value engagement teams, quality assurance activities that diagnose A3s, PDSA, RCCA. Those things are prevention. They're trying to find the cause to get rid of it. Once it's found, it can work its way into the appraisal. So these ranges always come down to, say, the 80-20 rule. Many of you know that Dr. Juran coined the Pareto principle. Some of it came from the fact that about 20% of the total operating costs are incurred as cost of poor quality. Just the idea that it's a significant part of your cost picture, and our job is to try to get rid of it. Personal self-check. This is where you can really beat me up, and I get to see it firsthand. Take a shot at that one. By the way, while you're doing that, for those who came in late, the presentation, in the next 24 hours, you will get a link to the presentation, and we are putting some new audio on the other presentations, and so they will be there every month we do these. So please feel free to not worry about getting the presentation. We will give you a link to it. We've had such good demand on that, we decided it's just easier to send it to everybody. Thank you for not making me feel bad, although one of you just kind of, so far I'm not helping you much. So I'll do my best in the last few minutes here to try to help you out. Or, the case is that you are doing the right things, and therefore there's no magic bullet here. Now, where's cost of poor quality found? And this is an interesting thing, because when I began my career, it was before just-in-time and before Lean and before Six Sigma. So, the traditional process was simple, that you have a process step, and you check. You have process step 2, and you check, and you deliver the product or service. And if there was something wrong with step 1, you check it again. And eventually, we actually put in some rework loops and feedback loops to make sure that everything worked. So from our initial process that we designed, we then had to add cost, add poor quality cost, create non-value added steps because we weren't sure what was happening. So most of my career was spent trying to identify these and get rid of them. When Six Sigma came along, we realized that as multiple people carry out these steps, the variation from person to person, day to day, week to week, also was occurring. And so cost reduction became not just finding these non-value added cost of poor quality, but identifying too much variation in the actual step itself. Here's an example. Two insurance agents, both working with a similar client. One has figured out how to complete all the information quickly in 2 hours, and another one takes 4 hours. The outcome is good, but the time it took was between 2 and 4 hours. If you go into a hospital and you're going to have a procedure done, one lab tech may take 3 hours to do it, the other one may take 2 hours to do it. So in other words, not only is my little thing here, I've lost my, there we go. Not only are these costs here suspect, but also the variation here, which also then creates variation here. So where are the costs of poor quality? They're hidden in the times that people do work. They're hidden in the extra steps. Now, why is it hidden? Well, let's say this is a department. It might show the staff of 6 people producing, 100,000 items a week. What they don't know is that it used to have 2 people producing 100 items a week, and now we have more. So it's built into the people costs. Once we start to examine how long does it actually take to do the work, you might find that we don't need as much labor. Now, I know you're all saying, well, geez, cost of poor quality is going to reduce labor. Well, yes, it does in highly intensive labor areas because, frankly, if you're managing waste and you get rid of the waste, then you're not managing anything. But what's really interesting is organizations don't improve fast enough to get rid of all that labor. What they do is they prevent the hiring of labor. If we can get our worst performers up to the best performers, that means we don't have to hire more people to create more outcome or output. So we want to find this hidden. So Six Sigma has done a good job of telling us and teaching us about variation. The lean folks go after the non-value added steps here. And here's another scenario. I've often heard this. Leaders say, let's reduce the cost of poor quality. And the first thing they do is they reduce the cost of the quality function, the quality department. What does that do? That removes features. In other words, they do these things not because they want to, but because something's going on over here. If you remove your quality function, you're going to find that these are only going to get worse. You first reduce the defect, then you start looking at how much labor you need to manage. Now, once you add this up and it comes up to that 5, 10, 15, 20%, and I can tell you this, folks, I've been doing this 26 years. I've never seen an organization that had less than 8% cost of poor quality, and most times it's about 18%. Those companies that have been going after quality improvement, Lean, Six Sigma, Baldrige winners, 2 things. One is they get very good, they get down to that 8 to 10% level. By the way, cost of poor quality never goes to 0. But after a while it creeps back up, not because their processes aren't good, because the environment changes constantly. So in other words, cost of poor quality is also created by the environments we live in. One day a competitor can come out with a new product and boom, your product is no longer accepted by the customer. You keep trying to produce it, you keep trying to fix it. Another example is if you're in the defense industry, a new fighter jet is getting funding, the old fighter jet is not, and as it gets wear and tear, you have to fix it more. So there's some real reasons why cost of poor quality keeps going, but there's still so much improvement opportunity out there. You don't want to not miss it, or you don't want to ignore it. Now this is what we use, this is how we use that amount of total cost of poor quality. So let's say that our total cost of poor quality is $50 million, or $5 million, or $500,000, it doesn't matter. What we do know is that you need to focus on the vital few, the 20% of the cost of poor quality that's going to give us the biggest bang for the buck. In our industry, we call those things projects. A project could be a daily root cause corrective action. It could be a large black belt like or master black belt like Six Sigma project. In any case, a project has a value. If we have $1 million problem and we can cut that $1 million problem in half, then the value is going to be that $500,000 less the cost of fixing it. So we encourage our clients to say, if you pick a project, identify what it's worth and aim to achieve that. So here we have a picture of black belt level projects with an ROI of $500,000. We have green belt with an ROI of $150,000. We have some lean improvement events at $250,000. I want you to just understand the concept. So if we were to say that we have a $5 million opportunity and we have $500,000 per project, then naturally we need 10 projects. And we need some people to work on those projects, so we need about 5 people per project. And we also want to have some experts coaching them, so we need 3 black belts. So if I took, in this case, this company has $12.5 million target of improvement, which was half of the $25 million cost of poor quality. So they said, let's try to cut cost of poor quality in half. And so they looked at the problems and they said it falls into this category. So what you want to do is you want to get your cost of poor quality total, then say what are the problems that are causing it, and let's make those projects. The projects are going to come in different sizes, and with those different sizes, we need people to work on them. I can tell you this, you could try it 1,000 different ways. If you don't break that cost of poor quality down into parts, and if you don't have a disciplined approach to process improvement or attacking it, it's just not going to happen. Cost of poor quality is hidden, it's in multiple functions, it crosses functions, and no single person is going to find it. So do yourself a favor of looking at this realistically and saying, okay, we're going to need big problems, little problems, medium-sized projects, and our resources are going to be this. Now you have to ask yourself, over what period of time do we want to accomplish this? So we suggest that cost of poor quality is always looked at as a 3-year horizon, cutting it in half. A 5-year horizon, cutting it in half in 3 years, and using each year as a way to plan your projects, to plan your improvements, to plan your resources by putting some value to them. So what we'd like you to do is first determine the use of cost of poor quality against your business strategy. In other words, how can we benefit from it? For instance, many organizations right now, they have Six Sigma-like programs or lean programs, but they're not really specific about what the goals are. They don't say, go reduce our total cost $20 million. They just say, go get lean, go get better. What we want you to do is say, hey, our business needs $10 million in additional return on sales this year. $5 million going to come from cost of poor quality reduction. Where can we find it? So we determine our use. We compare it to the strategy, and it's one of our weapons. We develop an assessment team to go out and do the actual cost of poor quality assessment. That takes a little discussion about scope. We're going to start with a business unit. We're going to start with a large or small business unit. I will tell you this, the smaller you go, the less valuable the cost of poor quality becomes because the numbers aren't exciting. So cost of poor quality, the larger the scope, the bigger the dollars, the more attention it's going to get. Then you get in, you start to develop a list of elements, and that means what parts of the business, what are the processes, how we're going to do it, etc. Create a plan. We typically look at a cost of poor quality estimate in taking 3 to 6 weeks, not 3 to 6 months. We also don't believe that you should do it on an ongoing basis like an accounting procedure. You should do it once a month, once a year, once every 2 years to reflect back on it. The whole point of this is to find out what the best cost of poor quality estimate could be, and then as you conduct the pilot and learn from it, you can adjust the process a little, but the real key is to drive projects. I will tell you this, everybody's going to want to ask, do we include lost sales in the cost of poor quality? And we answer it this way. If you have a purchase order that you can say you lost it because of a deficiency, include it. If you don't have that purchase order, don't include it. And in both cases, it's only going to create a dialogue of how do you know we would have gotten that sale. So our belief is that add up the total cost of poor quality without lost sales you're probably going to still have a significant amount of money. Assume you did lose sales because of it, and add another 10%, because you probably will be underestimating. Anytime you put in debatable costs, your folks are going to debate the category and miss the big picture. Cost of poor quality is about the big picture. So, and when we get in there and really say, okay, where are we going to start accumulating our tasks in our process? We first identify the process. We map it, or do some kind of value stream mapping to understand where does this process begin, where does it end, what are the tasks that are non-value, what are the checking, what are the documents, what are the databases, just like you do any other process map. Now, classifying them as non-value added, or in the categories of where it is where the digging comes from. How many times does it occur? Where in the process does it occur? What is the cost of it occurring? And those are simple spreadsheets that get set up based on some cost related to labor and materials and energy. And the real key is to the accumulation of those costs. In other words, one department may create a failure that another department has to add cost to. So cost of poor quality, the larger the value stream, the clearer the picture is going to become. And as we add it all up, we tell you to do it based on a year. So you get the year's demand, and you're always looking backwards. And if we do nothing to cost of poor quality, last year's cost of poor quality is going to be the same this year. What we do is look at last year's information, and we say last year we had a 10% of our costs were due to poor quality. If we don't do anything this year, it's going to be 10%. So of that 10%, we're going to report on it, and we're going to report it in Pareto fashion, and we're going to then use that to drive our annual selection of projects. And so that's kind of how that's done. Now, for those of you who are actually using the cost of poor quality, would you just do this little quickie for us? And by the way, what we do with these is, first of all, keep you awake. Secondly, keep you on the line. Third, it helps us get information that we can use in later webinars, or just immediately gives me a response that says, can I elaborate a little bit more on it? The third one about reducing cost but haven't had much success with it, that's the one we love to talk about because, the question is why. And one of the reasons we tend to see it is because you don't get the finance people to truly understand it up front. And so cost of poor quality comes from the operational side, but the finance people need to be brought on board. So if you're having trouble with that, always try to get the finance people up there first. Okay. As we begin to roll down here, we just wrap up with a couple of key points. By the way, we made a decision the other day that every webinar, if you're here at the end, we are going to pull a winner for one of our books, whether it's in English or other language. So stick around. So the other piece is that we find that recently there seems to be a wave. Every year or so, an industry says we're interested in cost of poor quality. Last year, the pharmaceutical industry, we had a lot of activity there. This year, electronics industry. So when something happens in the marketplace, it usually drives businesses to say, what do we got to do? One thing we find is that the internal staffing for cost of poor quality expertise is low, unless you've learned it in your organization and brought it in, or it's just not there. So what we suggest you do, just like you do with Six Sigma, Lean, any other good expertise, is create a team, a reputable team, internally, that learns what cost of poor quality is, and that can create their own internal structure and spreadsheets and whatever you want to use. Also, learn some cases or actually co-conduct the cost of poor quality study. The way we create internal teams is that we usually get brought in to help define the cost of poor quality. We identify an internal team so that they can see how we do it, and then they can reproduce it after we leave so that you create ongoing expertise. But you may want to do some self-sufficiency assessment to see, where it stands. There's usually two camps for cost of poor quality. One is it never changes, so why bother? The other one is it's so important we do it really well. And so my suggestion is that you try to educate those in the first camp and become part of that second camp. And also, you probably want to determine that cost of poor quality can become a dashboard or scorecard measure that can be very useful. I want to point out one thing to the healthcare folks. Michael Porter's book on curing healthcare, he quotes our cost of poor quality, but there are also a different terminology used in cost of poor quality in healthcare. Instead of internal failure, external failure, and appraisal, they tend to use misuse, underuse, and overuse of testing and procedures, and then process waste. So in other words, if you're in a hospital and you are a doctor who overprescribes tests, some of those tests are costing money but not adding value. If you underprescribe a test, a person might be harmed or not get cured. And misuse means we're improperly using the test that we should be using. And then process waste. So the terminology is not as important as what you make it. So if you develop a metric in your organization that is looking at non-value added costs, whatever you call it, it's up to you, but there are some industry accepted terminology there. The American Society for Quality publishes a very small book on the cost of poor quality. It's a good little publication. In all the books we have to talk about it because it's core to our knowledge. So, today's agenda, we want you guys to help leadership see the opportunity. If you need more answers, send them on to us. At the end, you'll see an email. Understand that link between profitability and cost of poor quality. You'll look like a genius. Try to help people understand cost of poor quality as an estimate. And what makes it good, what makes it not good. Obviously, try to do one. Someone says, how do I get management to listen? Try to go off and calculate the cost of poor quality by digging a little bit and come back and say, you guys are trying to improve profit $1 million, and I got $5 million over here in waste. And lastly, develop some internal expertise. It can go a long way in helping you accomplish the 4 items above this. So, once again, folks, 1 month has passed. This is number 4. We appreciate you hanging with us, and I'm going to let my background team randomly pick one of the people from the list, and I will announce it, or Scott will announce it, as the winner of a Quality Essentials book or a Juran handbook in English or Spanish, or the 2 that we have. We also have some in Chinese, Romanian, etc. So if you're a person who's a foreign language person, just let us know